Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by the genre's biggest cheerleader, Becky Spratford, to talk about her upcoming book, the essay collection, Why I Love Horror, with essays from the biggest names in the genre answering that titular question. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I know I'm usually the one helping to have you organize some of our summer scares episodes. So,
Yeah, and we've talked about having you on, I feel like, for a long time. So this has been one that's been a long time coming. And you had a book coming out, and of course, we had to talk about it. And so we decided to kind of talk about our horror origin stories or like the media that helped us on our journey to becoming a horror reader, which I'm very excited to get into. So, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about why I love horror and where the idea came from?
yeah, sure. It's so fascinating. I know you talked about me being the biggest cheerleader, and I totally agree with that. And I did that cheerleading through the library for those of you who don't
Yes.
know. So, I've written actually, this is my fourth book. I've written three textbooks for
Mhm.
librarians. And so, what I do is called Reader's Advisory. I'm not
Yes.
going to go into all that because that would take an entire podcast. But
Yeah.
basically, I match books with horror readers.
Mhm.
I help libraries help match books with horror readers. But the problem is, over many studies, and it's less so now, but over the entire century, horror is one of the genres that library workers as a whole are scared of the most. Like there's polls. I have actually some studies with links to the study and the poll from library places in my third book, The Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror, that came out in 2021. I have worked consciously since the second edition to sort of demystify and
Yeah.
make it less scary. So one of the lines in my book, in my other books, for librarians is horror readers are not monsters. They just like to read about them, right? But
Yeah.
you laugh, but like when I say that to librarians, they're like, "Oh, you're right.
No,
Okay."
I can tell you from experience as someone who picks up a lot of library holds, I get a lot of like, this is interesting." Or I checked out Now You're One of Us by Asa Nonami,
I
which has
love
like
that book so much.
that it has the bar of soap with like a black, you know, coarse looking hair on the bar of soap. And the librarian checking me out literally dropped it like it was contaminated. Like she held it up and was like, ew.
I am so glad this book came up because it's one of my favorites that I bring up as much as I can for people to read. But yes, this is what you get. It's funny because when I walk in my library, obviously, they know me and they're the ones that like horror come running out to talk about all of it. So on top of reviewing books so that libraries would put them in their collections, every October I would do a 31 Days of Horror blog series. And I've been doing it since basically 2010 to coincide with when I was finishing up the second edition of my book. And I went back and looked, and it's so funny. I started by asking some of the people that like work at Booklist who I'd been working with. So I have this like very young headshot of Daniel Kraus when we were coworkers at Booklist and his story about why he loves horror, but I didn't call it that then. When we really looked at it, it's been about 10 years that I specifically started a series called Why I Love Horror. And what
Yeah.
I do is it's by invite only, and I ask people, and I just finished asking everyone for this year to write me an essay in 1,500 words or less of why they love horror. And I let them go with it. And the idea is I tell them you're writing to library workers because those are the people that read my blog. And the idea is I tell the library workers, I tell them, this is an example for me to show you somebody who loves horror, why they love it. So we have different examples so you don't think they're all just crazy and mean and like murderous, and because we're not, we're all awesome.
Yeah.
But also how they write, you get a sense of how they write. So after doing that for many years, I was like thinking about this as I'm starting to go through like a transition in my work life as well. I started in 2015 working for myself, training libraries, and then knowing that this year, 2024, was the year I was going to end 24 consecutive years of elected service as a library trustee. So as I was coming to that, I was trying to it was my time was over, and I was trying to figure out what to do next. So in 2023, right, in the winter, I actually reached out to my friend Sadie Hartman and I said, "So, do you think people would want to read Why I Love Horror if it was a book?" And she's like, "Oh my God, of course they would." And I was like, "But how do I do that?" And so we talked, and then I got in touch with Lane Haymont, my agent, who then got me in you know, we worked on it. First of all, I need to say, the authors in this book, all of them said yes before we had a book deal.
Wow.
Before, like, anything, I said, "This is my idea. I really wanna get this out of the library world and into the hands of readers, because readers love horror right now." Look, they've always loved horror, but now it's okay for them to let love it out loud. And so I wanna get these authors into the hands of readers, but their story of why they did this to lead people to their books. And, they all said yes, and the ones who didn't say yes right away, or who said no, I guess, right away. But like Sylvia Miranda Garcia, she was like, "Becky, I would love to do this, but I am swamped. Good luck." And then the second it was done, she gave me a blurb. You know, like everyone was so kind. And the fact that they trusted me, I can tell not only that they trusted me, that they said yes, but then the things they turned in were just so personal that
Yeah.
I was just very, very touched. And I'm so glad to share it with the world.
And some of the essays in here are great. I think to say some of my standouts, I think where I loved Haley Piper's talking about Godzilla and kind of cultivating a love for horror through that. I loved Mary Sangiovanni's, and as a Rachel Harrison stan, I loved Rachel's essay, Permission to Scream.
Well, I have to stop with that one because I just use that as a, like, thing. I'm like, "Do you wanna understand why Rachel Harrison's so good at horror?" Well, it all goes back to low-fat yogurt, and they're like, "Wait, what?" I'm like, "Read the book to find out." I also love to tease, like, the reason Stephen Graham Jones wears black T-shirts has nothing to do with horror.
Things you'll find out
I
when
know.
you read the book.
The one that gets the most, though, moments where people text me or talk about online is Grady Hendrix, and there's a reason he's right in the middle of the book, you know? There's a reason.
Well, have to ask you, Becky, why do you love horror?
Yeah, it's funny because in this book, I purposely avoided answering that question. But here's why. Let me give a little why, and then I'll say why. Because I knew I'd be asked it when I went on book tour and promotion, so I'm ready for it. But I wanted the authors to shine and the things I add to the book. I did write an essay about why asking why is important when you're working with readers. But then I also introduce each essay with a little bit about the author to help you if you want to read more. But I never, ever talk about why I love horror. So I have thought about this a lot. And of course, doing what I do, reading and reviewing horror for a living, it's always come up. And I always thought the answer was, I lived a fairly boring suburban New Jersey life growing up. And I started to realize, though, that as I got older and did readers advisory work, I started to realize that, well, one of the reasons I was drawn to horror was because my life felt sort of like by the book. And these stories were all based on the emotions, and they allowed me to explore things like unease and fear and terror. And there was something just a little bit, naughty about it. And we'll
Yeah.
talk about that when we talk about the books that we really enjoy, because there's a lot of that there. And, my dad read Stephen King, so I knew about Stephen King, but I didn't think of myself as a horror reader. I always loved books that just made me feel off kilter and uneasy in like a dark way. And I thought, oh, that's just because I lived like a regular life. And then as I was working on this book, I started to do a little more digging. And about a year or two before I started working on this book, and maybe this is why I wanted to put the book out, and I've gone back and thought about it. I went through an experience that was extremely moving and unsettling and was really about thinking about who I am. And that was to apply for and receive Holocaust refugee reparation citizenship to the country of Austria. So the country of Austria was offering this citizenship to people up to three generations whose families were impacted by having to leave their lives behind because of Hitler. And it's like the country is doing this, right? It's really
Yeah.
hard to get Austrian citizenship. My Austrian attorney's kid is not an Austrian citizen. I need to just make that very clear. Like,
Wow.
he is, again, I'm a big proponent of birthright citizenship in America, right? But until this happened, I thought everyone had it. And this is, before now. Like, this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And his kid was born there, but him and his wife are British and Italian. So the fact that, so the kid is British and Italian, that they were doing this, and it was a process, right? We went over there. We didn't have to, but we did. We got to see where my family lived and all of these things, but really connect with the place and the really think about the place where my story began, but also it could have ended. And so there's a lot in that, which made me then reassess how I grew up. And I came to the realization, I laugh because it seems funny now, but most people, I just turned 50 this year. So my grandmother came to America when she was 12, and they were very well off, and they came over like on the Queen Mary. So when I was on the Queen Mary for StokerCon, that was really moving for me as well, in 2017. And they didn't have to leave behind their comfort. Like, they had Christian friends who brought their stuff over. But so you think, oh, I don't have, like, there's no horror in my story. But then I realized growing up, we were in a family that talked openly about everything that happened. We talked about the people who didn't make it out, right? My great grandfather always lived with the emotion of he couldn't force his sister to leave because she didn't believe anything was going to happen. And every family has a kooky aunt, but our kooky aunt was kooky because she was locked up in a convent and hidden in the basement, right? And I just thought everybody's kooky aunt was kooky for that reason. And so death and murder and real talk in my family with my grandmother, who I was very close to my whole life, I realized it puts this sort of, not pall, but this like veil of real life horror into a life that I just assumed everyone else had. So maybe I had a comfort with dealing with those emotions that made it easier for me to get into it.
Yeah, I could see that. That it was something you guys talked about openly and that you had kind of already dealt with in a way.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it really took me until I went through that process and went
Mhm.
to Austria and all of this, and then I really was looking at places to sell essays about the process. Like, where could I write, like, a story about this? I really wanna share these emotions, and then it just sort of naturally flowed into getting why I love horror out to more people, but not
Mhm.
making it about me because I had my experience of figuring it out, and I'm hearing so much feedback from people who've read the book early that, like, it doesn't just rekindle their own love of horror, it helps them to think about why it's so important to them. And it is cathartic for many people, as you know, doing this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is something people will take away from the book is having it be a reason for introspection to ask themselves the question, why I like horror, what would be my essay in here? What would I write about?
And there's people, it's so interesting. You're absolutely right. Not only do people ask themselves the question, and I hope it spurs people to write their own essays about it and think about it and find new authors who they connect with for similar reasons, but also like to read someone like Victor Laval, right? Who's one of the top authors in the genre, both critically and with readers. And his entire essay is how hard he fought against writing horror. And looking back, he's like, "Man, I was a moron." I mean, he didn't say it that way. He said it much more elegantly, but, like, that's the thesis. Like, I literally missed the signs. And that is one I think that will, especially people who are, aspiring writers will really like that one. But the thing is, this is for readers, and everything else I've done has been for librarians, so I really love that I'm going directly to the readers and not only, like, showing them why people love horror, but giving them a little snippet of their favorite author in a new way and maybe introduce them to another new author.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see that. So we are going to be talking about some of our books on our journey to being horror readers, but I wanted to ask, what was the first horror movie you remember seeing?
Yeah, so I mentioned I grew up in New Jersey and it was like so typical, as I said. So sleepovers and all that in the 80s, and the early 90s. But we had a house in the Poconos. And so we would be there all summer. And it was like pure Gen X stereotypes, completely unsupervised kids on bikes for the entire summer. Like, we could be a horror novel, our crew. Like, we got on our bikes in the morning. we went to all our things, we came home for dinner, and then we went back out at night. And so, of course, there were no dads around a lot. It was very stereotypical. There were no dads around during the week, and there was one video store, right? Because it was like the mid to late 80s. So, one kid would always like the mom would let us come to their house every pretty much like 2 nights a week, and whatever movie you want, kids, just don't bother us, like, right? And so somebody did Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it was soon after it came out, the very first one, and I had seen horror movies at, like, sleepover parties before, but this movie, like, you're with your friends and you're joking around, and we're a range of ages, like, my sister was with us 2 years younger, so not everyone's watching, some people are talking. I was mesmerized by this movie. Like, I could not stop looking at it. We also watched, like, the Pinhead movies that summer and a couple Jason movies, and right, and, like, Halloween. This was the one that got me, and I since have gone back and realized because I really love the supernatural elements of horror, and this is the one that has that heavy supernatural. But the imagery, the sleeping, like, I could literally see it happening in a way that I don't know if I could see like a slasher as much. And I couldn't get enough. Like, I still think about it. If and the second you ask me my favorite horror movie, it's always Nightmare on Elm Street. It's forever gonna be Nightmare on Elm Street. There's no other right answer.
I mean, it's a good answer. Yeah, if I was at a sleepover, I don't think I could talk during Tina's death scene.
No.
Like, I would be eyes glued to the screen, like, "I'm sorry, I'm not listening to you."
And like I was literally like, shh. Like,
Absolutely,
and I have to stress this was like an every couple nights a week thing. So like we normally just had them on and often they were
Mhm.
background noise, but so I can visually remember. Like I can see myself in this person's house. That's how important it was.
That's funny. I of my, like, group of cousins, I was the, like, youngest one and the only girl, so they did bully me quite a bit. It's fine, I feel like I'm better for it. But they had me watch Nightmare on Elm Street 4. Which,
Oh,
like, quality-wise, not as good as the first one, but had so many images on there that have haunted me, and a few that I thought I had dreamt up until I watched it recently, and I'm like, "Oh, no." Freddy Krueger, like, opening his shirt and having, like, sausage ghost things popping out like pizza out of his chest was that was in the movie. I didn't make that.
well, it's funny you bring that up because there's something in I think it's Clay McLeod Chapman's essay about something he thought he made up from a famous movie too. So that's a great segue. But also, and that's the problem with Nightmare on Elm Street that I don't think some of the other franchises did as they did they aged better. Like the Nightmare on Elm Streets, like the first one has just the right amount of like graphic scenes and
Yeah.
like let your mind sort of get it, follow into this story and get into this world.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry for that though, Stephanie.
Oh my gosh. Well, and then I remember like my 10th birthday, like I hosted a sleepover and we did a double feature of Urban Legend that I had on VHS and I watched all the time. So like that was fine. But we had rented Final Destination,
Oh,
which had just come out.
no. Yeah.
And when I tell you
Oh,
this anxious girl who already thinks bad things are gonna happen all the time did not need these scenarios. And I think, like, since then, Final Destination is actually very therapeutic for me in that seeing these, like, awful scenarios that I dream up played out in these ridiculously comical ways is very therapeutic. But at 10 years old, I was like, "Everything is going to kill me."
I Final Destination, I stayed away from for many years because same, like, anxious, always the worst things are gonna happen. But my husband loves Final Destination, but his and he loves the series and always has, but it's we've been together since, I was 18, so we've, seen it all, but he's a family doctor, so he loves it, from, like, a medical perspective. Oh, yes, you would die from that, and I can't watch it with him. I cannot watch it with him. He's like, "Oh, we should watch the new one," and I'm like, I will be gone this weekend. Feel free to watch it.
Oh my gosh, during movies is he always like, "They would have been dead by now. That would have killed you instantly.
He
You're not surviving
he
that."
really loves horror movies in general, more than me. I prefer the books, but I do like there are some that I just don't miss, but, and I tend to watch most of the ones that come out now, but he loves to go back and look at the old ones, and no, when he's in it, he totally gets lost in it, but the Final Destination, because they are so, like, medically accurate, he thinks it's awesome.
I love that. Well, I asked on Instagram, like, what the media was that got people into horror, so I wanted to share, like, some of the big answers. A lot of Goosebumps, Scooby-Doo, a lot of
Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo, Poltergeist, was a common one.
That was one of my first ones as a kid, I will say, yeah.
Courage the Cowardly Dog, the cartoon on Cartoon
Oh.
Network. Another one, Are You Afraid of the Dark? So
Mhm.
Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark were usually together. A lot of Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Yeah,
Ernest Scared
absolutely.
Stupid.
Oh, yeah.
And then I love there's a lot of, like, do you remember those, like, middle grade series, like the My Teacher is a Vampire,
Yes.
like the
Yes.
Bailey School Kids? So, a few of those, which I really liked, because 'cause we'll be talking about some, like, middle grade horror series.
Yes, we will.
Alright. Well, should we get into
I
talking
think
about
we
some of
should. So
these?
I love this idea because Stephanie was like, "What should we talk about?" I'm like, "Well, clearly we have to mine our backstories and like bear all of it for people." But we did, limit ourselves. What I think it was
Yeah.
to five, right?
Yeah.
Like five key moments as we age. So come and watch Stephanie and I, little Stephanie and little Becky, as we enter the world.
Let's start out with little Becky. What are you bringing to the
Oh, little
table?
Becky. This is great because I talk about this all the time, that I think I'm the only person who's going to have this answer. But it is Shel Silverstein, specifically Where the Sidewalk Ends. Now everyone's gonna be like, wait, what? This is not the Giving Tree, people. Don't, that is a bunch of hooey. Where the Sidewalk Ends, I was obsessed with. I cannot stress enough. Now, remember, little Becky was too young for Goosebumps. So, Goosebumps didn't come out till I was a little bit too old for them. I read them later. But Where the Sidewalk Ends, I literally have my copy next to me. It is falling apart. And this is the one I bought. My husband actually bought this for me in 2000 for Christmas. We did not have our first child till 2002. But he knew this was an important book to me. So if you think about the cover, it is literally a sign that says edge, keep off, and there is two children and a dog, and they are peering over the edge like into nothing. Now, there are poems in here, like one of the first poems is called It's Dark in Here, and it begins, I am writing these poems from inside a lion. It's rather dark in here, so please excuse the handwriting, which may not be too clear, but this afternoon by the lion's cage, I'm afraid I got too near, and I'm writing these lines from inside a lion. Like, and there's another one, there's two others in here that I think about literally all the time. There's the one that a lot of people know. Serious Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. She wouldn't take out the garbage. And at the end, literally, it fell on top of her. And poor Sarah met an awful fate that I cannot right now relate because the hour is much too late. And then finally, there's one I want to talk about, which is the one I always think about. It's a two-page spread called Hungry Mungry, and it is a hungry man who gets so hungry he ends up eating himself. Okay, this is, I need for people to understand. So I am the librarian in when there's like children's book week at work, and they're like, everyone write down their favorite children's book, and they're like, The Velveteen Rabbit, Green Eggs and Ham, and I'm like, Where the Sidewalk Ends. And my children, I have them read it very, very early. I read it to them. And my son, I was just talking to him yesterday. He's 20 now, almost 21. He was like, Mom, those poems were weird. They were dark and weird. And I'm like, Well, do you like them? He's like, No, I like them, but they're a little scary. And but I need to explain to you that, like, I didn't just read these books over and over again. I had the cassettes, and which was like a selection, and actually the version I have is the 21st anniversary with a CD, and it was Shel Silverstein reading the poems, and I would listen to them, not all of them, just a selection over and over. I think I probably broke the tape. I
Oh,
was just I something I should have known then, right? Something just fascinated me with these dark and twisted, just slightly off kilter from real
yeah.
world. Anyway, that is 100% my origin story.
I love that. I was also obsessed with that book, and in elementary school, we had to read a poem in front of the class, and I did I Am Getting Eaten by a Boa Constrictor,
I love that one too.
and I brought my, like, stuffed snake, and I acted out Like, I was, like, laying down by the end of it, like, from the floor as I was being eaten by this boa constrictor.
I love it. We ended up where we needed to be, Stephanie.
It was written in the stars. We
Did you
were
get a note home though? See, that's the thing, right? Like all these horror authors who like have stories of like getting a note home, like that they're like the teachers were worried about what they wrote.
they're probably like, "Wow, and brought in props. Okay." For my first pick, I am going to do a double series pick, and it was one that was mentioned a lot when I asked people about what got you into horror. And I mean, since elementary school, I was really into both of these series, but I remember in middle school, I carpooled with my best friend, and for some reason she had to be at school early. I don't know if she was in band and had like early morning band practice or something, but I was always like in school 45 minutes like before school started. So I went to the library. That was my safe place. I spent so much time there, and I would wander around and look at the shelves, but I would always find myself sitting crisscross applesauce in the S section. Yes, for R.L. Stein and Alvin Schwartz, because I was obsessed with both Goosebumps and the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series, and specifically the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series, because at least the first prints were these small snippet urban legend stories, but they had these incredible illustrations that were so haunting. So I just have so many memories of like sitting there with my backpack, like my back to the shelf on this library wall, just flipping through these morbid illustrations while getting my brain ready for like another day of sixth grade.
I mean, it seems appropriate. It's funny, we both picked things that have like creepy illustrations.
Yeah.
I actually am gonna get to interview R.L. Stein for all the Illinois libraries on a virtual event in February, and I'm very excited. He was at the American Library Association a couple of years ago when we were in DC, and he was taking questions, and the number of people who came up to say he literally saved their life.
Mhm.
And most of them were either people of color or they identified themselves as LGBTQ. And his graciousness, he's like, "No, I am glad I was there." Like, he let them all speak their truth, and he was so glad he had been there for them, and he was sorry, like, that they didn't have anything else, and, oh, that was one of the most powerful things I've ever seen in my life, and I just got to watch it.
Oh, that's so lovely. He seems so gracious. And I am doing a Patreon series now where I'm doing all the Fear Street books in order. And I've really never read them. So it's me and a guest like going through these for the first time. And it's been a ride because some of them are just bonkers.
Yes, but he definitely has an imagination.
He does. Like, I'm like, the FBI, cults, okay. In this small, like, Ohio suburban town. I love it.
Oh, and now we're gonna go to our preteen years, I guess,
Yeah.
and teenage years a little bit. So, again, I have it's just so fascinating to me, and I found when I share this next one, I get a lot of women my age who are, like, co-signing what I have to say, because again,
Oh, yeah.
we Stephen King was there, right? So I was what, 10 years old in 1985. So then I was, and we're talking about just the late 80s now. I know, again, the age of this book is important because I know that I was before my bat mitzvah because we moved out of the town I grew up in, Flemington, New Jersey, for anyone who knows New Jersey, to move north to Morris County after that, after eighth grade. So I know it was before my bat mitzvah. And I also know this because the only time I would go to the mall without my sisters, I have two sisters, was after when I had late Hebrew school. The year you're getting ready for a bat mitzvah, you have more place times to go. And so my dad couldn't bring me home right around bedtime for my baby sister, who's like 7 years younger than me. So we would go to the mall because it was New Jersey. And where else do you go? So we would go to B. Dalton and he would just let me go look. And every once in a while, he'd let me buy a book. So I knew he liked Stephen King, but like that was a guy, like, writing stories that my dad read. So, like, to me, it wasn't, like, cool, right? My dad read it.
That's so
But I
funny.
saw where Stephen King was, and in that B. Dalton, it was in a section called Occult. I mean, remember that day? There was, like it was in the back corner, and this was classic New Jersey Mall in the late '80s. And I went there and I just started looking at books, and I found V.C. Andrews' Flowers in the Attic. And
Of
again,
course.
there are so many women who've come and told me, "Yes, that was for me as well." Like, but I just I fell in love with those books, and I'm gonna give full props to my parents. They never, ever censored anything we read. They believed that reading anything was fine. And so I was like, "Dad, can I get this one?" It's a because he said you can get one paperback. It wasn't every time. I went to the library quite a bit, but it wasn't every time. And one time he said I could, and I knew exactly which one I wanted with those covers that like the cutout, and then and I don't even want to start going into what that book is about because it'll change your rating on your podcast. But I was like, this was amazing. And then the next time I was allowed to get a book, like a month or two later, I picked the next one. I didn't even think they'd be at the library because to me they were like they only lived in the occult section of the bookstore.
That is so funny. And yeah, that does seem to be like a very Gen X female experience. Because I remember like right after I had my son, I think like for my generation, I was like a young parent because then like the mom groups I was joining, everyone was significantly older. And one group specifically, they started talking about Flowers in the Attic, and the comment section of like that was my favorite book was so long. I did not read Flowers in the Attic, but like right after I got married, I think the newer movie adaptation was on Netflix, and I put it on blind, did not know what this movie was about in any way, and my jaw hit the floor. I was like, "Excuse me?
Yeah,
Like, this is the book that everyone read when they were, like, 8 years old?"
I was like 11 at the oldest. Yeah, yeah. And then when I went to work in libraries, so I started working at the Berwyn Public Library in 2000, and, I, went VC Andrews had been dead for a while, but there were books still coming out, and I was like, "Wow." And they were at the beginning, right, of the section because I was in charge of adult fiction, and I'm like, "Wow, they're still here, and they're still being read."
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, going into my preteen years, it's funny because now there's that, like, trend on TikTok that's like you're a mom in the 2000s and it's like the Tuscan houses and having like the Bath and Body Works hand sanitizer dangling from your purse and listening to Nora Jones and having a coffee at Barnes and Noble. And I was like, first of all, that was my mom, minus the Tuscan kitchen house. We spent so much time at our Barnes and Noble because they used to have like seats there. You could really just hang around, and so we did, like, every weekend, we would go to Barnes& and Noble, and I went straight to the teen section. I think I read basically almost everything they had there, and I remember really getting into Lois Duncan. They had a lot of Lois Duncan. I read I Know What You Did Last Summer, I wanna say, like, Daughters of Eve, a few other books, but the one that really traumatized me was Killing Mr. Griffin. Did you ever read this one?
No, I did not read that one, but I was a teen librarian in those years, so I was buying all of those books. So I in my head, I think I know the plot synopsis from buying it, but
Yeah, like, I think, yeah, I think Simon and Schuster had an imprint called, like, Simon Pulse, and they were, like, reissuing a bunch of stuff. Um, and yeah, so Killing Mr. Griffin is about this really harsh grader, this like mean teacher at this high school who like doesn't cut these kids a break, and he's making 3 kids like repeat the class the next semester. And there's one girl who's normally a straight A student, but she's like floundering in his class, and by floundering like a B, B or C. And she's like hanging out with these kids who are popular kids. They're like president of the student body, like head cheerleader. And they kind of come up with a plan to kidnap Mr. Griffin and force him to like change their grades. Um, I'm gonna spoil the book. Sorry, it is very old.
it's
But
very old.
but he's married, he has a wife at home. I don't remember if she's pregnant. I think she might be
I
pregnant because
feel
that
like
just
she might have been, but
yeah, that just adds to this, like but, they kidnap him and they hold him captive, and he has a heart condition and doesn't take his medication, and he dies. And that's, like, halfway through the book. Then it's like they're, getting their story straight, and they're trying to do this whole cover up, and at the funeral, the, you know, now widowed pregnant wife of this teacher, like, gives the main character, like, a paper where he tells this girl that she has, like, a lot of potential and, like, he's very excited to see her work and all this stuff, and so it's just, like, absolutely that was the first time I knew a book could hurt me. I could really, like, sit and just stare at a wall
I
after
and it's
reading.
funny, so we talking about this, we both picked books by female authors geared toward young women, and I can't not reader's advisor this whole thing, so, and be like the horror expert on appeal, but I there's something to be said for when they market to the women, to the young girls, the books didn't end up in horror sections. You know, so when I was in the early 2000s, when I started working at the library, I was also doing the teen department. And we had like the Fear Street and the Goosebumps and the, was that other one, that Cirque de Freaks?
Oh, yeah.
We had all those on spinners, right? Those were like, that was our horror stuff.
Mhm.
But the Duncan, she was hugely popular, but filed in with all the regular fiction.
Interesting.
And you can see that with a lot of these types of books, and same, like, VC Andrews was never really included in horror, but it's how a lot of women found horror because it was marketed to women, and Lois Duncan, same thing, oh my gosh, so popular, I had adults coming in to get those books. Yeah, they're all about how they make you feel, like, 100%, and they make you feel really icky because, like, you're like, "Ooh, this is kinda cool." They're like, "Wait, what am I what? No, I should not be rooting for this." Like,
Yeah. Oh my god. And then, at that era too, because no one ever remembers this, Francine Pascal, the woman that wrote the Sweet Valley High books, had another series she wrote called Fearless, which was about, like, a teen protagonist that, like, physically couldn't feel pain, and she was, like, an action star. It was essentially like Heroes before Heroes.
yeah,
Okay. I
it's
feel
just
like no one
fascinating.
remembers that.
Yeah,
It's one of those, like, "I promise you this was real."
and I bet you can find them somewhere, but also, like, at a library too, because people still
Yeah.
read these, but the thing is, the whole point is, when you're a young woman who likes these illicit, dark
Yeah.
things, where you found them was very different from where the boys found them, but
Yeah.
they were still writing them for you in different places.
That is interesting.
Speaking of women, we go on to the
Yeah.
next one, right?
Yeah.
So, as I started to get a little bit older and a little more literary minded, of course, I was introduced to Shirley Jackson in one of those gifted and talented programs. I don't know if they read her now all the time, but I will not spoil the lottery if you have never read it.
Oh, no,
But
no.
like, that is the experience that every reader should have, is to read The Lottery. There's a reason that that story got the most fan mail and most negative fan mail to the New Yorker still to this day. That that cat person one a couple years ago did not break her record. Um, and this is a seminal work of a story that needs you makes you go stare at the wall, like you just said. And it is one of the best, like, technically best stories ever written. But what it did was, I think, introduce the world, speaking of women, that women could be dark and eh, what people think is evil, but is actually just, sharing the darkness that's inside all of us. But when women show it, it's shocking. And I love that. I love that about Shirley Jackson. But The Haunting of Hill House, then the novel as well. So
Yeah.
that led me, the lottery I read, I think, like in ninth grade or eighth grade, one of those. And then as I was going into high school and I was looking for things to read, I found The Haunting of Hill House. And it is just such a perfect book for so many reasons. But it is a perfect book for horror fans, for today's readers, because it set that standard of what psychological horror is. And could it be supernatural or could it just be on people's heads? Both answers work. And I
Yeah.
love that because it adds a whole nother level of chilling.
Yes. I love that book.
Yeah, I have I'm keep looking over here to the side. I know people can't see me, but I have a poster of the cover. So
Is it
yeah.
like the, like, bluish, like,
Yeah,
vintage one?
yellowish
Okay.
with the flower, yeah, just to, ground me every day, like, this is, like, the inspiration to do this, and I'm just so glad that so many people appreciate what she did. I'm so proud to be part of the Shirley Jackson Awards on the advisory committee. I'm just I it, like, took too long, obviously,
Yeah.
but again, society cannot deal with women when they don't act a certain way or when they like things that are like not exactly what women quote unquote should like. And she still did it, and we're still reading it.
Love that. Well, going into my teen years, listeners may or may not know, this was when my parents got involved in Christian fundamentalism. So, my access to horror was a little limited. I actually just read an essay collection by Noel King called Jesus Land, and it was about this kind of bizarro world of Christian pop culture. And it's like, I think for people outside of it, you don't know that for every major pop culture figure that pops up, there is a bizarro Christian version of that. There is a Christian Britney Spears. There is a Christian this. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, probably not something like Stephen King, though. And to that I say, oh, sweet summer child, we had Frank Peretti.
We had lots of Frank Peretti at the library. Yep.
I did not read a ton of his work just because I don't know. As someone who grew up for the majority of my early life secular, the Christian equivalents just never hit the same. Like they very much felt like the Timu knockoff version of like whatever. I did read House, which was written by Frank Peretti and Ted Dekker, who was another Christian horror author. And I will say this book was actually genuinely creepy. I did not reread it, so I cannot speak to how well it holds up. It's probably like a grown fest. Like me as a adult who does not identify that way at all anymore, it probably doesn't hold up. But it got a movie adaptation that was rated R.
Whoa.
I know, okay? Like, they were leaning into this hard. But this is about a couple, that's having problems. I forget where they're driving, but they have car trouble, and it's, like, right in front of this hotel, so they check into this hotel, and there's, like, another couple there, and they find themselves stranded in this dark hotel by this, like, a dark figure that, throws them like a tin can with this message on it that's like, "God came into my house and I killed him. I'll kill anyone that comes into my house. You need to kill someone by midnight, and I might let rule 2 slide." And so it's these people, like, stuck in this place, turning against each other, but it's really about them in this hotel facing their own specific trauma. Like, the couple lost a daughter. She went ice skating and fell through the ice and drowned. And so it's them like working through this issue and like forgiving themselves, but in this like horror setting. And it was the most nuanced I felt like Christian media had been to that point. Because if you, I don't know, have ever watched like a Christian made media, there's not a lot of nuance there because it's usually a tool for evangelizing, and they don't ever want the sympathies to be with the wrong person. So everything is very heavy-handed because it's very like message first. It's a tool for getting this message across. And I don't know, I remember liking it. Like I said, I did not reread it. I cannot speak to how well it holds up.
But it stays in your memory as an important point, and it's an important point of your life as well on your
Yes.
journey to being who you are. So I think that that's the reason we're doing this, right? That's
Mhm.
and I think this is a really good example of, we'll get back in a minute to the books, but I think this is a really good example to why I love horror, the essays, right? How
Yeah.
people looked at things. All of them had, not all of them are about, I was a scared child or I wanted to be a writer. Like they're all very nuanced. And that, like each of our stories are very nuanced.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, okay, so now we're jumping ahead. We only allowed each other 5 books. So both of us have a huge jump into this century. But I think independently, we picked what I think are the two best books of this century. Independently. And I would have, there's reasons for me to have picked the one that Stephanie picked, but I picked one. And anyone who has heard me talk about anything anywhere knows that the book I think is the best book, horror book. Well, I think it's one of the best books, period, written this century, is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And so in the time between, high school and college, in college, I was an American Studies major, and I didn't get to read a lot for fun, although I really learned to love Nathaniel Hawthorne and appreciate him and Edgar Allan Poe from a not just liking to read them, but from a literary standpoint. But then as I grew, started to go through my library school training, which I finished in December of 2000. I have to always remember that because my degree says 2001. It's very confusing. But I was starting to get more back into horror, and so I feel like though the Only Good Indians is one of those moments that is the now, like where horror
Yeah.
now jumps off, as well as the book that Stephanie's going to talk about as well. But so I read The Only Good Indians in the fall of 2019. It came out in 2020. But again, I read super early for review. And I read The Only Good Indians, and I had read and loved Mongrels. I was a huge proponent of Mongrels. I had read some stories by Stephen Graham Jones. Um, but this story, it has everything a horror story needs to have. It has revenge, it has horrors of the outside world, of growing up native in the world, but also like the violence in the world against everyone, and there's still love and hope at the end. Look, there's a mangled dog. I tell people that up front. You got to get over that. Like it's there. If you don't want to read it, fine. There's some really gruesome scenes, but there's also this hope that, like,
Yeah.
the next generation's gonna do better, which I love. Anyway, I love this book. I have reviews you can read, I have things I've written about it, and when I finished this book, I was literally one of the first people to read this book, and the first thing I did when I finished it, after taking a deep breath, and I was like, "I just think I read one of the best books I'm ever gonna read." Instead of, like, writing that down, I texted Paul Tremblay, who had been my favorite, like, he had, like, the last couple of years, the best book of the year, in my opinion, and The Cabin at the End of the World is amazing, and so I texted him and I said, I said, "I haven't read your 2020 book yet, but I think I just read the book that's gonna be the best book of the year, sorry." And he went, "You just read The Only Good Indians." So, like, this was not like, it wasn't just me that got blown away,
Yeah.
and I think that helped me, like, realize, and of course, we now see Stephen Graham Jones being the voice sort of this generation, and there's a reason his essays last in my book, both because of how he wrote it and why, and really, Brian Keene is first and Stephen Graham Jones is last, and there's a reason, right? They are the bread of this sandwich that this book is. But I knew when I read that book that something different was going to start happening with the genre, that we were going to be able to tell stories that were supernatural horror, that the scares and the kills and the all that stuff we know was done well, but that there was this real life story behind it. There were things that you could feel in your gut that weren't just monsters, that you understood. I mean, the fact of like everybody's had a transgression when they're a kid that
Yeah.
they later have to have ramifications to play back for, to come to. So, anyway, that's mine.
Oh my god, I love that book. Ah, just, like, there are so many scenes from that have, like, haunted me, like ceiling fans and
Ceiling fans! Totally ceiling fans! I know, we're gonna ruin everybody. I always
I
say
know.
that, yeah. I like to say about that book, you're not gonna love it while you're reading it. It's going to give you so many emotions, but when you finish it, you're going to be so glad that you went through it.
So, yeah, then moving forward, this is my out of college, married with a baby era. This was a time where I felt like I had to find myself again, like, I had moved away to where I live now, Pittsburgh, from California. Like, I was outside of college, I was away from my friend group, from my family, and I really wanted to get back to my reading roots. And I remember just feeling really lost for a bit. My pre-college memories of reading were YA, and I remember trying to read a YA book as, like, a 24-year-old woman, and I'm like, "This just I can't get into this." It's not for me, and this was during the, like, dystopian craze of, like, Divergent, and I was like, "I can't." And I was watching a lot of BookTube, and I started making BookTube videos myself, and I remember somebody was holding some kind of a contest, and I won, and they mailed me a mass market paperback of It by Stephen King, and I had never read Stephen King because, like, when I was a teenager, I was reading teen stuff, and my parents were deep in Christian fundamentalism, and I think that's the one name they knew, like, "No, you're not reading
Yeah, no,
Stephen
on the
King."
no list.
Absolutely not. Um, but I remember with my cousins watching the It miniseries, so I knew vaguely what it was about, and I could not believe how sucked in I was to this, 1,000-page story. I was so invested in all of these POVs. I remember being so surprised that I was even invested in the library clippings. Like, I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's also horror in here," talking about, like, explosions happening during Easter egg hunts and children's limbs being found in trees. And I remember thinking, like, I think I like horror because I want more of this. And I remember years later picking up A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay and loving a book in a way I did not know could be that I could love a book. Just the absolute ending that had my jaw hitting the floor, but the whole time just loving every minute of it, not knowing what was going on, loving this moody atmosphere, loving this like reality TV angle exorcism, what's real, what isn't. Like I was constantly going back and seeing if I could find evidence that went like either way. When I started the podcast, I remember Paul said yes to coming on like pretty early, and I was like trying not to fangirl the entire time. I think I had, like, very specific questions, like, about the book, like, I was an absolute
And did you
fangirl.
go, "I need to know the answer," and he's like, "Nope, there is no answer. The answer is whatever you want." It drives people absolutely wild with him.
No, I think I accepted the ambiguity, but I'm like, because it was also around that time, like, they're everywhere now, but kind of these look backs at, like, let's revisit this show from my youth, like, let's revisit this thing and see how it holds up, and that's a part in the book where there's a blog series called, like, Post from a Final Girl or something where she's revisiting this reality show series. And so we were just like talking about things like that. And I'm like, were you inspired by this like turn of collective nostalgia, like looking back on things that we grew up
Like,
with?
"I'm gonna sound smart." I love it though, but it was really a turning point for horror. This Paul sort of taking over with his voice
Hmm.
and adding it has helped others not just get to be published, but like see what they can do with the genre as well, and how he honors the past. I mean, there's for those who don't know it, it's an homage to
Hmm.
it to Shirley Jackson,
Yeah.
and if you don't know that, it's still great.
Yeah. And I didn't know that.
Yeah,
So then when I read Shirley Jackson, when I read We Have Always Lived in the Castle, I was like,
Castle.
hmm. I was like, I see. Okay. Okay.
If we did this with my 23-year-old, and she is currently working for Publishers Weekly, so she's in the publishing landscape. That book, we've always lived in the castle, is like her moment of like, wow, this is a book that I loved this book,
Hmm.
and it's going to stay with me forever. Yeah.
So that was mine.
This is our journeys
This is
taken for what you want. But I do really believe that, as women, we bring a different perspective to this
yeah.
than a lot of the other voices that have been heard talking about it. So I'm glad we did this.
Absolutely. And listeners, I would love to hear about your horror journeys through books. So I have a few questions I like
Okay.
to ask people. One I would like to ask you is what's your chilling obsession?
Unfortunately, the real world is a dystopian novel.
It is.
And being a librarian, I used to love books like Fahrenheit 451. I cannot even look at it. The the plague of book banning is I try not to be obsessed with that, but I'm going to talk about how to turn it a little bit. But it's been something I've been living under it for 5, 6 years now, and it just seems never ending. Both as a librarian, but also as a trustee and as a leader in the library community. I'm on the intellectual freedom committee for the Illinois Library Association, and the things we get all the time is not, you know, things that are trying to happen in Illinois, a state where technically it's illegal to ban books. Okay, let alone everywhere else. But here's the thing that I've been obsessed with that I'm going to make everyone else upset. I have been going around, and you might have seen me do a version of this at the Bram Stoker Awards. but I want to be your chilling obsession. I'm going to give you an example of when I went to a room full of publishers, small press publishers, and librarians at the American Library Association conference in June, this past June. I was moderating a panel on book challenges and how publishers can help us. And I think I made everyone in the room be scared of me because I said, I'm in a room here with publishers, with all these publishers and all these people. As a library trustee, who's someone who's been fighting this fight, I'm here to help to talk to you about how you can help us. So I'm going to ask you all to raise your hands. How many of you, and it's like a room of 200 people, have ever gone to your library board meeting ever to speak for intellectual freedom? Two hands went up. And I looked at them and I said to them, shame on you. And they all started laughing nervously. And I said, no, 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 no. Literally, shame on you. And then again, and I gave Stephanie the link to give to my full keynote speech that I gave at the Bram Stoker Awards. I was a little harsher at this one because these were publishers. The world is spinning out of control. I know it is very hard for people. I know that the news is a horror cycle. Trust me, I know. But all of us listening to this podcast love books. We are spending time listening to a book podcast. We love horror. Well, horror is happening right in front of us. You need to go to your library board meeting. You need to know that when your library board meets, and you need to show up when there isn't a problem. And you need to show up and you need to talk to the board to thank them for their varied collections. Point out some of your favorite books. It would be great if they were by marginalized voices or LGBTQ people, because that would help a lot. One of the best books I've read all year this year is A Game in Yellow by Haley Piper. Your library probably has it. You know why? Because I gave it a star review in Library Journal. And if that happens, they usually buy it. Like, point out books that others might want to ban or limit access to others and say, hey, I love that you have this, because the only people going, that's my
Mhm.
chilling obsession. Like, I'm watching, the only people going are these horrible, hateful people who want to stop other people from reading. You can look, I don't like it, but you can tell your kid, like Stephanie talked about, you can be in charge of what your kid reads. That's the way America is, right? When my kids were little, we listened to unfiltered pop songs, so I had to remind them not to sing the curse words when they were with their friends. But like, that's fine. That was my choice. And but and that is a choice, and I wish it weren't, but parents have the right to choose what their kids read, but they don't have the right to choose what everyone else reads. And so I am obsessed with what's going to happen, you know, if we have a generation of readers who never encounter either someone like them, that the way they are, or they don't encounter other points of view of other people, because reading fiction, horror specifically, gives people empathy. There are studies that prove this. And if we're not giving people empathy to read about people that are different than them, then we are in for, I am chillingly obsessed with how much worse everything's going to be. And I'm sorry to bring it all down, but there's action. All of you listening to this, go right now onto your computer and look when your local library board has their meetings. Mine is the third Tuesday of the month at 7:30. I was there for 24 years in a row. That just ended in May. I still go back to meetings. I've been taking a break now, but I'm going back in September. I didn't want to crowd them right away with the new board. Um, and just to be there, and there's always a chance for public comment. And you can, they'll say, now is the time for people to speak on items not on the agenda. And you can say, I'm here to talk about some of my favorite books that you have, or I'm here to support the fact that you allow access to every kind of book. Just something for them to hear that's positive. Because guess what? The other side has an orchestrated attack
Mhm.
where they know that the board will listen to comments, and they're flooding comments in writing and in meetings. And when all the board hears are the people that want to stop access, even the ones that want to stand firm, it starts to snowball. And they're like, well, it's taxpayer dollars. Everybody wants us to get rid of these books. But they don't. The vast majority of us who love reading stay out of it. And that is what's making me nervous and literally keeps me up at night for the last 5 years.
Yeah, you are not the only librarian I've heard say this. I follow, a woman who goes by Sad Beige on TikTok, but she has a Substack talking about this. That's like, "I'm glad you post your Instagram stories. I'm happy you have, like, an I love my library bumper sticker, but you need to go to the meetings."
And I know we're all busy.
Yeah.
Look, I understand this, but like, it's one night a month. And in my keynote for the horror writers, I said, look, get your friends and figure it out. Like, you go one month, someone else goes the next month, like, alternate. But this is literally everything. Like, this. this is the next generation. This is how we get out of this horrible cycle we're in, is by letting people read and experience the stories of as many different people as possible, because we live in a global society. And let me tell you, not everybody looks the same and not everybody is the same. And your community, no matter how you think it looks, there is somebody of every identity in your community somewhere.
Absolutely. Well, that is a good call to action for a
Sorry to bring it all down. We were like, flowers in the attic, head full of ghosts, goosebumps.
You know what? It's needed. And like, wasn't it said that they really looked at the numbers and they could trace like the amount of books being challenged to like a very few number of people that were just
Oh, yeah, in
militantly writing challenging books, not having any specifics, just going by titles and like picking marginalized people.
that is a great point to make, and I do wanna spend a little more time talk about that. So, like, in Florida, for example,
Yeah.
where their laws they have all these laws that allow everybody to challenge everything. So they found out it was, like, 11 people in the whole state that were banning all the books. So at my library in Illinois, we were able to shut down our collection policy. So because books are bought with public dollars, right? Even though we are professional, all of us who buy the books, by the way, have master's degrees. We take courses in collection development. We understand what we're doing, but we have policies that allow for reconsideration of materials because they are paid with tax dollars. Although someone told me recently, do you have a reconsideration of where that stop sign was put? Because that's tax dollars. And I thought, that's a new tactic. Maybe we don't need our reconsideration policies. But going back, we have them. We closed our down that you cannot request reconsider something if you don't live in the district and aren't paying taxes to the library, because making that request takes time. We have
Yeah, that's
to
labor.
yeah, we have to, like, check and see why write a statement as to why we bought the book, and also, you have to have read the book, and you have to
Yeah,
mark a few things, and, yeah, it's we made it a lot more onerous.
as it should be. I mean, shouldn't be in this situation at all, but it is what it is. Pivoting from that to the second question that I have for guests, and that is, Becky, what is your final girl song?
This one was easy. Again, as you heard, I'm a Jersey girl, but I'm a Jersey girl of the generation after the boss. So I am John Bon Jovi from the start to the finish. When I was in high school, the album New Jersey came out. I mean, come on, you live in New Jersey, there's an album. The band is from down the street. I had like a one of those black and white silk screen like poster place. But it's clearly this is a song I was obsessed with. It's actually by John Bon Jovi solo. I was also obsessed with the movie it was from, and it's Blaze of Glory. And it's from Young Guns 2, talking about sequels, not Young Guns 1. I was obsessed with that movie. Also dark, right? Because, spoiler alert, Billy Kid dies. Um, but Blaze of Glory, it's totally, and I'm thinking about the video even while I'm thinking about it.
I love that. I looked up the video so I would like have a feel for the song and I'm like, "Oh yeah, this feels very Jersey." It
He's, like,
feels
on
very
a mountain, he's, like, screaming and look, he's not a final girl because he dies, but we're going down. Like, you can, like, walk away like, I just see it walking away with John Bon Jovi on that mountaintop in the video. Yeah,
I see it. I see it.
yeah.
Well, Becky, thank you so much for coming on here today and talking to me about why I love horror and our horror journeys. Where can people find you online?
People can find me online, Blue Sky at RA for All, but mostly all the work I do is on my blog, RA for All. I just look it up, and RA for All Horror is specifically the horror blog where I talk about books and I talk about issues that are in libraries. So if you want to understand what libraries are going through and how we do the work we do, that is the place to find me. I find it funny that like it's in library textbooks, but and then I'll be around. I'm going to be around traveling this great country all fall. So come see me at a couple places, lots of libraries I'll
Yeah,
be at.
of
Yeah.
course. Gotta hit up the good places. Well, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and I cannot wait for our next year of Summer Scares podcast too.
Yay! Have you
Even
guys
though I'm
started
not on them,
planning
I'm always
already?
oh, it's exciting.
Books in the Freezer is a bi weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and Blue Sky at Books in the Freezer, or send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. Show notes for this episode and all previous episodes will be at booksinthefreezer.com. If you would like to support this podcast, there are a few ways to do that. One of them is to become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer, where there are different tiers of support with different perks. You can get things like early episode releases and even access to the new Fear Street bonus series if you would like. So again, all that is at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. There are also affiliate links to bookshop.org and Libro FM and Fangoria available in the show notes. And if you're looking for a free way to support the podcast, it's as easy as sharing on social media. Tell your friends about it. Interact with the episodes, even leaving a comment on Spotify. Tell me what's the media that got you into horror. All of that helps. I have been your host, Stephanie Gagne. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time on Books in the Freezer.